Imagine standing in the blazing Mediterranean sun, a heavy iron helmet pressing down on your head, the weight of your shield cutting into your shoulder. Your stomach growls, but you don't dare complain. You are a Roman soldier, a legionary of the world's most feared army. The question is simple. Could you survive on what he ate every single day? At first glance, it doesn't look so bad. After all, the Roman Empire wasn't run by fools. Its soldiers had to march 20 miles a day, build forts, dig trenches, and still have the strength to fight when the trumpets called. But when you look closely at what a soldier's rations really were, the story changes. The backbone of a Roman soldier's diet was grain wheat, mostly. Not bread like we imagine today, soft and fluffy, but something far harsher. Soldiers were often issued raw wheat kernels, a sack of them, sometimes more than 2 pounds a day. It was up to them to grind it down into flour using a hand mill they carried themselves, mix it with water, and bake it into dense, chewy loaves of bread. No yeast, no softness, just a heavy, brick-like slab of calories. Now pause for a moment and think. No butter, no jam, no olive oil, not even a sprinkle of salt unless you were lucky. Just grain, ground down, kneaded by calloused hands, and baked into something barely edible. Could you stomach that? Day after day, month after month, and this wasn't just one meal. It was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Grain in different forms, bread, porridge, or a rough kind of pancake. Imagine your jaw aching from chewing, your body craving flavor, and yet your only relief being the occasional handful of dried fruit. If you were fortunate enough to buy some at the market stalls that followed the legions, the Romans were practical people. They believed food was fuel, nothing more. A legionary's rations were designed for survival, not pleasure. Salt pork was sometimes issued a fatty, salty cut of meat that could be boiled with grain to make a crude stew. But meat was rare, and when you did get it, it was tough and stringy. The kind of thing you'd rather feed to a dog than chew through yourself. Wine, watered down heavily, was another staple. Not the rich, full-bodied wine you might picture, but a sour, almost vinegary drink. The Romans diluted their wine not out of temperance, but out of practicality. It killed bacteria in water and kept soldiers hydrated on long marches. So yes, you drank wine every day, but it was hardly luxurious. It was survival. Now imagine the toll on your body. 2 pounds of grain, maybe a bit of pork, a splash of wine. That's it. And yet, with this diet, soldiers were expected to carry armor weighing nearly 70 pounds, march for hours under the scorching sun, then dig earthworks late into the night. The calories were there, but the variety wasn't. Over time, many soldiers suffered from vitamin deficiencies. Scurvy, weak bones, and exhaustion crept in silently. But here's the real twist. The Roman soldier wasn't just feeding himself. He was keeping alive the most powerful military machine in the world. His rations weren't personal, they were political. Behind every crust of bread was an empire's logistics system, an army of farmers, millers, and transporters making sure the front lines didn't starve. In many ways, Rome's true power wasn't its swords, but its supply chains. So the next time you imagine yourself in sandals, shield in hand, ask yourself honestly, could you endure day after day of dense bread, sour wine, and the occasional scrap of pork? Or would you, like many recruits did, find yourself dreaming of figs, honey, and roasted meat? Luxuries forever out of reach on a soldier's pay? This was the hidden struggle of the Roman legionary, not just the battles, but the hunger. And as we peel back the layers of his daily rations, we discover a truth that few can stomach. Most of us today wouldn't last a week. Dawn breaks over the Roman camp. The sound of a horn cuts through the silence, dragging every man from his sleep. There is no gentle morning, no steaming coffee, no soft bed. Instead, you rise from the hard earth, brush dust from your cloak, and reach for the same food that sustained you yesterday, grain. The morning meal is crude, a porridge called pulse. Crushed wheat boiled with water until it thickens into a gray, lumpy mass. Sometimes a soldier might sprinkle in a shred of cheese or a pinch of salt if he was lucky enough to have bought some from a passing trader. Most days, however, it was plain just water and grain. You spoon it into your mouth quickly because there is no time to savor. The day's march waits, and Rome's armies never linger. With stomachs only half filled, the legionaries packed their kits. Each man carries his own millstone, his iron tools, his shield, javelins, and helmet. Altogether, more than 70 pounds of equipment strapped to his back. As the sun rises higher, the march begins. Now think about this. 20 miles. That was the standard. 20 miles under the beating sun, boots grinding against gravel, armor clanking with every step. And all of it fueled by nothing more than grain porridge and a crust of hard bread tucked into your pouch. How long would you last? The Romans believed discipline was stronger than hunger. A soldier who complained about rations faced punishment. Hunger was a weapon as much as the sword. It taught endurance. It forged obedience. The legionary was expected to march until his feet bled, fight until his arms gave out, and eat whatever Rome gave him without protest. At midday, if fortune allowed, you paused for a short break. Not a feast, not even a meal, just a bite of hard bread carried from the morning. This bread was no comfort. It was like chewing stone, so dry it stuck to your throat. Many soldiers softened it with a splash of wine, the sour liquid soaking into the crust, making it barely chewable. That was lunch. Then the march resumed. By evening, when the sun bled red over the horizon, the camp had to be built. Every soldier dug ditches, raised ramparts, and pitched tents before he was allowed to rest. And only then, finally, came dinner. Dinner was not so different from breakfast. More grain. More bread. If supplies allowed, pork fat boiled into a stew, giving off a greasy smell that clung to the air. Some soldiers roasted onions or garlic if they had managed to trade with local farmers along the march. Others stirred beans into their porridge, thickening it into a crude soup. To modern eyes, this diet looks harsh, repetitive, even miserable. And yet for the Roman soldier, it was routine. But here's the secret: many recruits didn't make it. The diet wasn't just fuel, it was a test. Weak men, men accustomed to luxury, men who longed for soft food and rich flavors, they withered quickly. Their bodies gave out before their wills did. The legions had no place for them. Rome's army was not just a fighting force, it was a filter, designed to strip away comfort and see who could survive. Those who endured learned to embrace the monotony. Hunger became familiar, bread became sacred, and the watered wine became a nightly blessing. To eat more was to be spoiled, to crave more was to be weak. The legionary's body was hardened not just by iron discipline, but by a constant reminder: survival was never guaranteed, and Rome owed you nothing but the grain in your sack. Now picture yourself in that camp, the smoke of fires rising, the chatter of men around you. You tear into your bread, sip the sour wine, and lie down on the earth to rest. Tomorrow it will be the same. Grain, march, bread, wine. Could you survive this cycle? Not for days, but for years? Most of us would break. Most of us would cry out for flavor, for comfort, for variety. But the Roman legionary endured, and in doing so, he carried the empire on his back. The Roman army was more than just soldiers. It was a living machine, a beast with an appetite that never ended. Imagine an army of 30,000 men marching into Gaul, each man consuming nearly 2 pounds of grain a day. That's over 60,000 pounds of wheat every single day. Multiply it by weeks, by months, by years, and you begin to see the staggering scale of Rome's challenge. Feeding its legions was as much a war as fighting with swords. This was not an accident. Rome's leaders understood something every empire before them had neglected: an army that starves cannot conquer. The brilliance of the Roman war machine was not just in its generals or its tactics, but in its supply chains. Grain was gathered from across the Empire, Egypt, Sicily, North Africa, the fertile valleys of the Tiber, and shipped in massive quantities to where soldiers needed it most. Caravans of ox-drawn carts creaked along dusty roads. Fleets of ships hugged the coastlines, their bellies swollen with sacks of wheat. At every frontier fortress, granaries rose from the earth like temples of survival. And yet, even with this intricate system, shortages were common. Armies on campaign often had to forage, stripping villages bare of their harvest. Farmers wept as soldiers took their wheat, their olives, their wine. It was not theft, the Romans insisted, it was requisition. The empire fed itself by draining the provinces dry. But the logistics were relentless. A soldier might grumble at the hardness of his bread, but the fact he had bread at all was a triumph of organization. Without it, the legions would collapse. Roman generals understood this deeply. Julius Caesar himself once wrote that the key to victory was not simply strategy, it was supply. Armies, he declared, march on their stomachs. The daily ration, then, was more than food. It was a symbol of Rome's control. Each grain of wheat had been planted by a farmer hundreds of miles away, harvested, transported, stored, measured, and finally issued to the soldier in his camp. It tied him directly to the empire's vast machinery. To eat was to be part of Rome, but there was another truth: grain was predictable, meat was not. While pork or beef could rot quickly in the heat, wheat endured. Stored in sealed granaries, it could last years without spoiling. For this reason, meat became a luxury, a reward, something soldiers might taste only on rare occasions. On festival days or after great victories, meat was distributed in celebration. The rest of the time, it was bread, porridge, and wine. Always the same. The empire's enemies knew this too. One of the most effective ways to cripple a Roman army was not to face it in battle, but to cut off its supplies. Burn the fields, poison the wells, destroy the granaries, and suddenly the strongest army in the world was reduced to weakness. Many Roman defeats, hidden beneath the glory of their victories, were not the fault of the sword, but of the stomach. Think of it this way: the Roman army was like a predator stalking across the world, but its claws were its roads, and its teeth were its wagons of grain. Without them, the beast starved. And yet, for all its brilliance, the system had cracks. Soldiers stationed at remote frontiers often went weeks without proper supplies. When grain was late, hunger gnawed at the ranks. Men scavenged roots, hunted rabbits, even boiled leather to soften it enough to chew. Desperation was not uncommon. The official ration might sound harsh but manageable, but when the system failed, survival became a brutal game. Now, ask yourself, could you live under such uncertainty? To eat bread today and wonder if tomorrow's ration would even arrive? To march into a hostile land not only with enemies waiting in the forests, but with the fear that your stomach might betray you before the sword did? This was the hidden war of the Roman legionary. Not the clash of steel, but the constant, nagging hunger that stalked every camp. Behind the glory of empire was a truth rarely spoken. Rome conquered the world on empty stomachs, and most of us today could not endure even a fraction of it. Bread, grain, porridge, wine, again and again. For a few weeks, perhaps you'd endure it. For a few months, you might still manage, but for years? That was the true test of the Roman legionary. Because behind the empire's discipline and glory, there was a quiet enemy growing in the bodies of its soldiers: malnutrition. At first glance, the diet seemed solid. 2 pounds of wheat could deliver over 3,000 calories, enough fuel for long march and hard labor. Yet, food is more than calories. It is strength, recovery, and vitality. And in this, the Roman ration often fell short. Wheat was filling, yes, but it lacked vital nutrients. Vitamin C, for instance, was almost non-existent in the daily ration. Without fresh fruits or vegetables, soldiers risked scurvy, bleeding gums, aching joints, and slow-healing wounds. Imagine being cut in battle and watching the wound fester, not because the blade was sharp, but because your body was starved of what it needed to heal. Protein was another scarcity. Pork fat, dried beans, or cheese appeared occasionally, but not often enough. Muscles needed for carrying armor and swinging swords were constantly strained yet rarely nourished. The Roman soldier was lean, yes, but often dangerously so. His strength pulled more from sheer will than from balanced nutrition. Ironically, many soldiers carried diseases inside them without knowing. Worms thrived in undercooked meat or contaminated grain. Diarrhea, bloating, exhaustion, these were as common in the Roman camp as the clash of steel. And with water sources unreliable, the legionary depended on watered wine to stay alive. Without it, dysentery swept through camps like wildfire. But perhaps the greatest toll was not in the stomach, but in the bones. Archaeologists who study Roman remains often find evidence of stress: worn teeth from grinding hard bread, damaged joints from endless marching, and brittle bones weakened by poor diets. The rations kept soldiers alive, but only just alive enough to fight. Their bodies were tools to be used, not protected. Rome demanded endurance, not comfort. And yet here is the paradox. Despite the shortcomings, soldiers trained, fought, and conquered vast territories. How? Because hunger itself became a weapon. To live with less made the legionaries stronger in spirit, if not always in body. Where softer men might wither, the Roman soldier endured. His stomach was not just a vessel, it was a forge. Every pang of hunger hammered him into something harder. Still, the cracks showed. Some soldiers grew thin and sickly, their bodies betraying them in the heat of campaign. Others collapsed during long march, their legs trembling under armor too heavy for a frame denied real nourishment. The army punished weakness, but it could not erase it. For every disciplined legion, there were men who suffered silently, broken not by swords, but by bread. Now imagine yourself in his place. Day after day, the same meal. Bread so coarse it cuts the gums, wine so sour it makes the throat burn, pork fat that clings to the teeth. No relief, no variety. And as your body weakens, you are asked to march further, dig deeper, fight harder. Could you? The Roman soldier did. Or at least the ones who survived long enough to be remembered did. The rest, those who succumbed to hunger, to sickness, to frailty, faded into the dust of history, their bones unmarked, their names forgotten. This was the hidden cost of empire. Rome's legions conquered the world, but they did it on empty stomachs and weary bones. For every victory, hunger was the silent companion. And for every feast in the Senate, there were thousands of soldiers far from home, gnawing on hard bread in the dark. The question remains, could you? In the bustling streets of Rome, a different kind of life unfolded. Bakers pulled steaming loaves from ovens, their crust golden and soft, not the brick-like slabs issued to soldiers. Market stalls overflowed with figs, olives, honey, dates, and cheeses. The smell of roasted lamb and fish drifted through narrow alleyways. Civilians, especially the wealthy, lived in a world of flavor and variety, even as soldiers far from home gnawed on dry bread in the mud of some distant frontier. The contrast was stark. A Roman citizen in the city might sit at a tavern and enjoy a plate of lentils stewed with onions, served with warm bread and dipped in olive oil. A soldier, on the other hand, crushed raw grain with his millstone and boiled it into a tasteless porridge. At night, a wealthy merchant might sip wine sweetened with honey, while the legionary sipped his ration of sour, watered-down wine meant only to stave off thirst and disease. This divide was more than culinary, it was symbolic. Civilians could indulge in the empire's wealth because soldiers endured the hardship of securing it. The banquet tables of Rome were built on the empty stomachs of its legions. Even the poorest peasants often ate better than soldiers. Farmers had access to fresh vegetables, herbs, and sometimes milk from their goats. They could flavor their meals, however simple, with whatever the land provided. Soldiers did not have this luxury. They lived on what Rome gave them, uniform rations, stripped of taste, designed for one purpose: endurance. And yet soldiers were not ignorant of this divide. Letters from legionaries, scratched on wax tablets and found centuries later, tell of men dreaming about fresh fruit, cheese, or a proper loaf of leavened bread. They envied the civilians even as they despised them. Civilians might eat better, but they lacked the discipline, the strength, the honor of the legion. This resentment ran deep. When soldiers returned to Rome, many found themselves unable to adapt to civilian indulgence. Their stomachs, trained for years on plain grain, rebelled against rich foods. Their bodies craved the bread they had once despised. Hunger had changed them. What was once a burden had become a kind of identity proof that they had lived harder, endured longer, and suffered more than those they defended. But this resentment could also spark violence. Armies cut off from supplies sometimes looted civilian towns, taking not just grain but livestock, fruit, and wine. For the hungry soldier, the line between protector and predator was thin. Rome's strength depended on keeping its legions fed. When the rations failed, discipline often collapsed with them. Think about it. As a soldier, you carried the empire's weight on your back. You endured hunger so others could feast. You protected roads that carried trade, ships that brought olive oil and wine, fields that grew figs and grapes. But at the end of the day, your reward was not luxury. It was survival. A few loaves of hard bread, a bit of pork fat, a splash of sour wine. The empire thrived on this imbalance. Soldiers were the backbone, civilians the beneficiaries. The Senate could dine on exotic dishes from Africa or spices from the east, because soldiers starved in the forests of Germania or the deserts of Syria. Every bite of roasted lamb in Rome was balanced by a soldier somewhere chewing on dry crust. And so the Roman legionary learned not to crave what he could not have. He embraced his ration as a badge of discipline, a reminder that he was different from the rest of the world. Hunger separated him from civilians. Bread was not just bread, it was proof that he was Rome's iron. But now imagine yourself again. You are in the camp, tearing into your ration of grain bread. You picture the banquets of Rome, the figs dripping with honey, the olives glistening in oil. Do you grit your teeth and endure, proud of your discipline? Or do you curse your fate, dreaming of flavors you may never taste again? This was the cruel reality of Rome. The empire's glory was built on two kinds of meals, one of indulgence and one of survival. And only the soldier knew which truly kept the empire alive. The Roman legionary was not merely a fighter. He was an embodiment of control, of order, of iron will. But what most histories forget to mention is how much of that discipline was forged not only on the battlefield but at the dinner table, rather in its absence. Hunger was not an accident in the Roman army. It was a tool. Every ration issued was measured carefully, deliberately, almost ritualistically. The empire could have supplied more variety, more flavor, even more abundance. Rome was a land of olive groves, vineyards, fruit orchards, and fertile fields. Yet for the common soldier, luxury was withheld. Why? Because Rome understood that simplicity bred obedience, and obedience kept the legions invincible. To live day after day on grain, pork, fat, beans, and wine was to train the body in restraint. The legionary learned not to crave more than what was given. He learned to take pride in endurance rather than pleasure. In this way, rations were as much a weapon as the gladius at his side. Picture the soldier sitting at the edge of his campfire, chewing slowly on his dense bread. He watches the flames rise, listens to the wind over the fields, and accepts his hunger without protest. This was the Roman ideal, a man who mastered his body by denying it. Hunger became proof of strength. Craving became weakness. This mindset separated soldiers from civilians. Where the people of Rome filled their tables with olives, cheeses, figs, and honey, the legionary embraced plainness. To him, indulgence was dangerous, softness was betrayal, and fullness was laziness. He was not meant to live comfortably. He was meant to endure. The discipline extended beyond the meal itself. Grain was issued raw, and it was the soldier's duty to grind it, knead it, and bake it. This simple ritual reminded him daily that survival was in his own hands. No servant, no cook, no market stall, just him and the grindstone, him and the bread. Each loaf was not merely food, but a lesson. The empire gives only the essentials, and the rest is up to you. But hunger does not leave quietly. It gnaws at the body, it whispers to the mind. And here is where Rome's genius lies. The soldier's hunger was not wasted. It was transformed into fire, into discipline, into loyalty. To suffer together at the same table of meager rations made the legion one body, one will. No man could claim more than another. Every soldier chewed the same hard bread, drank the same sour wine, and bore the same ache of an empty stomach. Hunger united them more than banners ever could. And yet, hunger also tested the mind. Recruits unused to hardship often broke within months. They missed the flavors of home, the goat's cheese of the hills, the sweetness of ripe figs, the warmth of family feasts. They faltered, grew resentful, whispered complaints when the bread hardened their teeth or the porridge turned sour. Rome had little mercy for such men. Those who could not adapt were punished, humiliated, or cast aside. Weakness was contagious, and the legions could not afford it. The survivors, though, were transformed. They no longer dreamed of honey or roasted lamb. They learned to savor what they had. The taste of beans in the porridge became a treasure, the bite of garlic a feast. A strip of pork fat boiled into stew was a banquet worthy of song. Hunger taught them gratitude for even the smallest additions, and in doing so, It reshaped their entire relationship with food. Now think about this. Modern armies today provide variety, balance, even comfort in rations. Soldiers are fed with science, their meals designed for maximum performance. But the Romans took the opposite approach. They fed their men just enough, no more, no less. To survive was not just to be nourished, but to conquer the hunger itself. It is easy, from our kitchens filled with spices and our shops lined with flavors from across the world, to say we could endure what they endured. But could we? Could you wake every day knowing that for months, even years, the only thing waiting for you was bread, porridge, and wine? Could you march 20 miles with armor biting into your shoulders, fueled only by the grain you ground yourself the night before? Could you fight, bleed, and build under the weight of an empty belly? Most could not. The Roman legionary could, and it was hunger, as much as discipline, that made him dangerous. Hunger carved his spirit into iron, hammered his will into unbreakable shape. Bread was not just sustenance, it was a lesson. Porridge was not just food, it was training. Every mouthful denied the soldier softness. Every empty pang hardened him further. This was Rome's secret. It conquered not with abundance, but with restraint. Its soldiers were sharpened by hunger, molded by simplicity, and bound together by the shared ache of survival. They carried not only swords into battle, but the discipline forged in every meal. And so we return to the question, could you? Could you survive not just on the food, but on the hunger itself? Could you accept the emptiness in your stomach and turn it into strength, day after day, year after year? For the Roman legionary, there was no choice. Hunger was his master, and in obeying it, he became Rome's weapon. The Roman soldier's stomach was a battlefield of its own. Imagine walking hundreds of miles across scorching plains and frozen mountains, carrying equipment that weighed nearly as much as your own body. You were ordered to move quickly, silently, and without complaint. But with every step, hunger gnawed at your insides like a hidden enemy. The typical soldier was given modius a ration of grain that could be turned into bread or porridge. On paper, it sounded adequate, about 1 kilogram of wheat per day. Enough, perhaps, for sustenance, but this was no feast. This ration had to be stretched and shared with comrades at times, and it was rarely consumed in comfort. The soldier carried it in his pack, grinding it down with primitive tools whenever the legion halted long enough to prepare a meal. Now picture this. After an exhausting day of marching under the Mediterranean sun, sweat dripping down your back, you finally stop at dusk. You drop your pack, and from it you pull a handful of rough grain. You must light a fire, grind the kernels into flour with a stone, knead it with water into a sticky mass, and then cook it on a crude pan or even over a heated shield. What emerges is hardly bread as you know it. It is tough, gritty, and dry, barely edible, and yet this is your lifeline. Salt was scarce, and butter or oil was a luxury. If you were lucky, your commander might issue you a splash of vinegar to mix with water, creating a sour drink called posca. It tasted sharp and bitter, but it killed bacteria and kept thirst at bay. It was no wine, no sweet nectar of Rome, just sour liquid survival. As weeks wore on, soldiers dreamed of meat, of roasted boar, or even a simple stew of vegetables and fat. But meat was rare, reserved for victories or special hunts. Instead, dried beans or lentils were the closest thing to variety. The body, driven by endless marching and training, began to crave fat, protein, anything beyond wheat. And yet, most soldiers simply endured. The hunger was not only physical, it was psychological. Imagine the monotony of eating the same tasteless bread every day. Soldiers joked about their rations to keep spirits up, but many developed a quiet resentment. Hunger bred frustration, and frustration bred weakness. For every mile conquered by the legions, a battle was being fought within each soldier's belly. The Roman military system was precise, almost mechanical. It knew that too little food meant collapse, but too much food meant slowness and laziness. So the rations were calculated for survival, not comfort. They kept you alive, barely, but they also kept you hungry enough to stay lean, disciplined, and desperate. The empire wanted soldiers who could suffer, who could march despite exhaustion, fight despite starvation, and obey without complaint. And so the question lingers, could you survive on this? Could you walk 30 miles a day on sun-hardened roads, carrying 40 kilograms of equipment fueled only by rough bread, lentils, and sour vinegar water? Most people today, used to balanced diets, coffee, sugar, and modern comforts, would collapse within days. The Roman soldier's ration was not designed for taste, it was designed for endurance, for turning ordinary men into machines of war. As the soldiers marched on, their rations remained the same. No matter the weather, no matter the distance, no matter the terrain, and yet these same men carved an empire across 3 continents. Their stomachs may have been empty, but their determination was iron. But hunger was only one part of the story. Food wasn't just about survival, it was about morale. And when morale broke, so too did the might of Rome. Imagine waking up before dawn, the camp still cloaked in mist. The centurion's voice bellows across the lines, and you are already lacing your sandals. Your bag of rations, that same dry wheat, salted pork, and a bit of vinegar water, is strapped tightly to your pack. Now begins the part that few modern people could endure, the endless march. Roman soldiers were nicknamed Marius mules because they carried burdens heavier than a mule ass. Their packs could weigh up to 45 kilograms, filled with weapons, rations, cooking gear, and sometimes even parts of the camp fortifications. All of this was on top of the armor strapped to their bodies. The daily march was not a leisurely stroll. Legionaries were expected to cover up to 30 kilometers in a single day, across whatever terrain lay ahead: jagged rocks, swampy wetlands, scorching plains, or snowy hills. Imagine trying to walk that distance in heavy hobnailed sandals that bit into your feet, with no socks to cushion the strain. The rations you ate earlier, maybe a chunk of bread and some pork fat, sat heavy in your stomach. Every step was a test of will, but the march wasn't silent. The air was filled with the clink of armor, the thud of boots, and the constant sound of orders barked down the line. Discipline was everything. Falling behind could mean punishment or, worse, dishonor. And when midday came, there was no stopping for a warm meal or a refreshing break. Instead, you tore a chunk of dried wheat cake from your pouch and washed it down with a sip of sour vinegar water called posca. It was barely enough to keep you going, but the Romans believed the sour liquid helped fight thirst, clean the water, and harden the stomach. Now imagine doing this for days on end, sometimes weeks, without respite. The marches were designed to break the body and build unyielding strength. Many recruits collapsed. The ones who remained standing became soldiers forged in the fire of endurance. The rations, meager though they were, had to fuel this grueling routine. Today, even with modern energy bars, supplements, and bottled water, most people would collapse long before the Roman soldier ever stopped. The average person could not last even a week on this routine, let alone years. What made it possible was not the food itself, but the iron discipline of the Roman way. Hunger became a companion, pain became familiar, and exhaustion became normal. When the camp finally came into sight, the men still did not rest. They built the fortifications, dug the ditches, and raised the walls, all before their evening meal. Only then, by firelight, did they allow themselves a bite of their coarse bread dipped in oil or vinegar, and maybe a scrap of meat if fortune favored them. And here is the most dramatic truth. The Roman soldier's body wasn't teen-nourished into greatness. It was driven, punished, and tested until it adapted. Survival wasn't guaranteed. The rations were not a feast. They were a gamble. Could you survive on them? Perhaps for a few days. But could you carry 45 kilograms, march 30 kilometers, and then build a fortress before sleeping on the ground, day after day? That was the test of the legionary. That was the measure of Rome's iron will. The march wasn't just about getting from one place to another. It was about proving who could endure and who would break. And if you broke, Rome left you behind. No matter how carefully Rome calculated rations, no granary could follow the legions everywhere. Soldiers marching through Germania, Britain, or the deserts of the East often found themselves far from supply lines. That's when survival became a brutal test of creativity and desperation. The standard ration bread, beans, a bit of pork, and posca was simply not enough for continuous, grueling campaigns. Hunger, now more than ever, became a companion and an adversary. Foraging was a necessity. Soldiers learned to hunt small game rabbits, hares, birds and trap fish in streams and rivers. They dug roots from the soil, boiled whatever green plants they could identify, and gathered nuts and berries. Some of these plants were edible, some barely, and some could even make them violently sick if misidentified. Mistakes were lethal, yet survival demanded risk. The forest, marsh, or desert became a teacher of caution, ingenuity, and endurance. The soldiers also learned to trade with locals. A farmer might barter a few eggs or some cheese for Roman nails, bronze coins, or even wine. Sometimes these trades were tense, for local populations feared the soldiers' presence as much as they craved their coin, but necessity drove negotiation. The hungry soldier would bargain, plead, or even threaten if required. A single loaf of wheat could stretch a mile. A chicken or a handful of herbs could mean the difference between strength and collapse. Raiding villages was another grim solution. When supply lines failed, commanders sometimes allowed soldiers to take livestock, grain, or preserved food. These raids were carefully calculated, not indiscriminate pillaging, but tactical survival. Yet they left soldiers morally conflicted. The food that kept them alive often came at the expense of innocent civilians. Hunger hardened them physically and morally. It forged a harsh pragmatism. Survival was paramount, ethics were secondary. The environment also dictated ingenuity. In the cold northern forests, soldiers learned to boil leather scraps to extract nourishment. In arid deserts, they rationed every drop of water, sometimes digging small pits to catch dew. In marshlands, they boiled reeds and tubers, eating the parts of plants most others discarded. Adaptation was the key. The Roman army did not simply rely on rations. It relied on the flexibility, creativity, and stubborn endurance of its men. Despite these hardships, some soldiers thrived. They learned to stretch meager supplies, supplement their diets creatively, and maintain strength despite hunger. The leanest men often became the fastest, the strongest, and the most resilient. Meanwhile, the weakest, those who could not hunt, forage, or endure the monotony of the ration, fell behind. Some died quietly in the wilderness, their bodies discovered months later. Others became too weak to march and were left behind, sometimes buried by comrades, sometimes forgotten. And yet, even amidst the cruelty of hunger and the constant struggle for food, camaraderie developed. Soldiers shared their meager finds, split fish, nuts, or a small handful of grain with their comrades. Every shared morsel became a bond stronger than armor. Hunger united them in a way that victory alone could not. A man who shared his last bit of bread earned loyalty, respect, and sometimes life itself. But consider this. Could you survive it? Imagine weeks without consistent meat, relying on foraged roots, tiny fish, and occasional herbs. Imagine tracking rabbits through snow, boiling plants of uncertain safety, drinking vinegar water to avoid infection, and carrying your pack for 30 kilometers daily. Modern soldiers might struggle for days in survival exercises, yet Roman legionaries did it as part of routine duty year after year. This was the hidden warfare of the Roman army, not against barbarians, not against rival states, but against nature itself. Each day, soldiers faced hunger, fatigue, and the threat of disease. Every step demanded strategy, endurance, and courage. And it was not just physical hunger took a psychological toll, sharpening the mind to the point of obsession. Soldiers learned to measure rations, preserve food, and plan meals carefully. Every morsel was precious. Every sip of Polska mattered. Ultimately, survival was the foundation upon which Rome was built. Without the ingenuity, endurance, and grim pragmatism of its men, the empire could never have expanded. Every conquest, every mile of road, every fort built in hostile territory was sustained by soldiers who learned to survive on the thinnest edge of subsistence. Hunger was their constant companion, and yet it was the fuel of their endurance. So again, the question arises, could you survive as they did? Could you live for months or years with minimal food, improvising every day, foraging in dangerous lands, sharing your last morsel, marching endlessly, and still finding the strength to fight? Most people would break within weeks, perhaps even days. But the Roman soldier endured. Hunger was not merely endured, it was mastered, and through it, Rome itself was forged. The Roman soldier's diet was not merely meager, it was relentless, unyielding, and unforgiving. For the men of the legions, hunger was not a passing discomfort. It was a constant, gnawing companion that shaped every step, every swing of a sword, and every decision made in the field. While rations were calculated to sustain life, they were not calculated to sustain comfort, nor to prevent the silent destruction that hunger could bring to the human body. Imagine this: a legionary marched 20, 30, sometimes 40 kilometers under a blazing sun, or through the mud-soaked forests of Germania or the icy winds of the British Isles. On his back is a pack weighing nearly half his body weight: armor, weapons, cooking equipment, a small supply of rations. Each footstep sends shockwaves through his ankles, knees, and hips. Blisters form, joints ache, muscles cry out for protein and fat that are scarce. Every day, the same hard bread and sour vinegar water are all that fuel him. The effects of such a diet were cumulative and devastating. Malnutrition was rampant. Lack of vitamin C from fresh fruits and vegetables led to scurvy, a disease that caused bleeding gums, brittle bones, and extreme weakness. Many soldiers were too proud to admit illness, but bodies eventually betrayed them. Teeth cracked and wore down from the constant chewing of coarse bread laced with grit from the grinding stones. Fatigue became constant, a dull thrum running through every limb. Even a simple injury, a cut from a blade, a twisted ankle from uneven terrain, could become life-threatening when the body was underfed and weakened. Disease was equally relentless. Dysentery, contracted from contaminated water or poorly stored rations, could sweep through a camp like wildfire. Soldiers forced to march while ill weakened the entire legion. Fever, exhaustion, and dehydration were common. The empire's supply of medicine was rudimentary. Often the treatment was rest and hope. Many died quietly, their bodies buried hastily outside the fortifications, their names lost to time. Yet hunger was not just a physical burden, it was psychological. Imagine being so weak that your hands tremble when gripping your spear, yet being ordered to hold the line against a charging enemy. Imagine watching comrades collapse from exhaustion, knowing you could be next. Hunger sharpened the mind in some ways. It taught patience, resourcefulness, and endurance. But it also drove men to despair, anxiety, and sometimes even mutiny. A hungry soldier is not just a body in pain, he is a mind pushed to the edge. Some soldiers learned to adapt in astonishing ways. They became masters of stretching rations, hunting small game, gathering wild plants, and trading with locals for whatever nourishment they could. In forests and deserts, in marshes and mountains, these men became survivalists of the ancient world. A single handful of nuts, a trapped rabbit, or a few leaves of edible greens could keep a man alive for days. And yet, no matter how clever, no substitute could fully replace the sustenance of a proper diet. Even with ingenuity, the body paid a toll. Muscle mass dwindled, bones weakened, and energy reserves ran low. Legionaries marched lean, yes, but lean was not the same as healthy. The strongest men were often those whose bodies were driven to endurance through constant hunger, pain, and repetition. But even they carried the invisible scars: chronic joint pain, poor dental health, and susceptibility to disease. The discipline enforced by hunger was both the army's greatest strength and its cruelest weapon. Soldiers who endured became almost superhuman by modern standards, capable of feats that today would seem impossible. Yet they were also living on the razor's edge, vulnerable to collapse at any moment. Hunger forged resilience, but it did not forgive weakness. Many men who seemed strong at first were quietly lost to the silent killers: exhaustion, malnutrition, and infection. Psychologically, hunger bred focus. Every action, every choice was shaped by the need to survive. Planning rations, conserving energy, deciding whether to hunt or forage, these decisions occupied the mind constantly. A legionary who could not manage hunger effectively could compromise the entire unit. And here, Rome's brilliance as a military machine becomes clear. The hunger itself was a form of training. It forced soldiers to think strategically about survival, to anticipate scarcity, and to endure pain without complaint. Now, imagine yourself in their place. You wake each morning with an aching stomach, carrying armor that digs into your flesh. Every step is agony, yet you must march onward. Your teeth are worn from grinding bread. Your joints scream with fatigue. You know that a single misstep, one moment of weakness, one misjudgment could cost your life, and yet you must continue. Could you endure it day after day, month after month, year after year? For most people today, the answer is no. Modern comforts, abundant food, and medical care have dulled our ability to survive under such extreme conditions. But the Roman soldier endured. He carried the empire on his back, fought battles under extreme physical stress, and survived on rations designed not to please but to test. Hunger was both his tormentor and his teacher, shaping men who could accomplish the impossible. And the lesson for us today is staggering. When we imagine the legions, we think of shining armor, brilliant tactics, and battlefield victories. But the true engine of Rome's might was invisible. The relentless endurance demanded by meager rations, the silent agony of hunger, the daily struggle for survival that forged discipline, resilience, and unity. Without this hidden cost, the pain, the exhaustion, the constant gnawing hunger, Rome could never have conquered half the known world. Could you survive as they did? Could you march through forests, deserts, and mountains carrying your life on your back? Eating bread that is barely edible, drinking sour vinegar, foraging for whatever you could find, all while your body aches and your mind is constantly tested? The answer is not just a question of will, but of endurance beyond what modern humans can easily imagine. Hunger was their master, and those who obeyed it became legends. The Roman soldier who marched into Germania or Britain faced challenges that went far beyond hunger. The rations, already meager and monotonous, were only the beginning of the trials. In these remote, wild territories, survival became an unending struggle against the land, the weather, and the invisible enemy, exhaustion itself. Germany was a forested nightmare. Endless woods, thick undergrowth, marshes, and rivers obstructed movement. Roads were scarce or non-existent, meaning every march involved hacking through dense vegetation, dragging wagons of supplies, and sometimes even building bridges from scratch. Imagine stepping into a forest where the air is damp, cold, and filled with insects. Your boots, already soaked, squelch with mud. Your armor, wet and heavy, presses into your shoulders. And in your pack lies the same familiar rations: hard bread, beans, pork, fat, and posca. The taste is nothing compared to the richness of home. Yet your body must stretch that bread across weeks, sometimes months, of campaigning. In Britain, the landscape was no less merciless. Soldiers faced rain that fell relentlessly, turning fields into mud that sucked at boots and drained strength. Rivers were swollen and treacherous. Hills and cliffs demanded every ounce of energy just to maintain footing. And the local population, far from welcoming, was hostile. Tribes set ambush, poisoned streams, and felled trees across paths to disrupt the Romans' march. Hunger made each step heavier, each obstacle more dangerous. One miscalculation could mean a soldier slipping into a river. Weak from exhaustion, his life depending on comrades who were equally fatigued and underfed. Despite these conditions, the Romans had a system. Soldiers carried minimal supplies, relying on speed, endurance, and ingenuity. Foraging became essential. In the forests of Germania, soldiers trapped wild rabbits, foraged nuts and berries, and boiled leaves or roots to supplement their diet. Poisonous plants were a constant risk, so only the most knowledgeable survived without illness. Rivers provided fish, but catching them often required improvisation. Nets made from rags, hooks carved from bone or even bare hands. Every meal was a test, every morsel a victory against the gnawing hunger in their bellies. The marches themselves were grueling. Soldiers often covered 30 to 40 kilometers a day, wearing heavy armor, carrying packs, and trudging through mud or snow. Feet blistered, joints ached, and every step drew more energy from a body already weakened by poor nutrition. Sleep was rare and uncomfortable. Men rested on wet ground or in hastily constructed shelters, always listening for danger. And yet they continued. Hunger and fatigue were constant companions, but discipline demanded forward motion. Falling behind meant punishment, or worse, being left behind to die. Food scarcity also tested the moral fabric of the legion. When local villages were found, soldiers sometimes raided them, taking grain, livestock, or preserved food. These raids were often essential to survival, but they left soldiers morally conflicted. Every loaf of bread taken meant sustenance for a comrade, but could devastate a family. Hunger hardened not just the body, but the soul, teaching the grim pragmatism that was necessary to endure campaigns that lasted months or even years. Even under these extreme conditions, some soldiers flourished. The strongest and most resourceful adapted to the land, supplementing their rations through hunting, fishing, and foraging. The leanest men became the fastest, the most enduring, and often the most respected. Others, weaker or less knowledgeable, fell victim to hunger, disease, or the elements. Entire units could be crippled if supply lines failed, demonstrating that the empires might rely on both planning and the raw endurance of its men. Climate compounded the challenge. Winters in Germania were harsh, snow and ice made travel slow and treacherous. Frostbite was common, especially in the extremities, because the body's energy reserves were already depleted. Soldiers rationed fuel for fires and often slept in cold, damp shelters. In Britain, rain fell nearly every day, soaking uniforms and packs, rotting leather, and creating mud-choked roads. Hunger made every step heavier, every challenge seemingly insurmountable. Yet the Roman army pressed on, maintaining formations, building forts, and engaging in battles that often tested them to the limit of human endurance. These campaigns illustrate the brutal truth: survival was never guaranteed. The combination of meager rations, harsh terrain, extreme weather, and relentless marching created a constant struggle for life. Yet, through hunger, discipline, and ingenuity, the Roman soldier endured. Hunger, fatigue, and environmental hardship became tools of transformation, shaping ordinary men into warriors capable of conquering vast lands. So, again, consider the question, could you endure it? Could you march through endless forests, slippery mud, freezing snow, and driving rain, subsisting on dry bread, vinegar, and the occasional root or small game? Could you survive the gnawing hunger, aching joints, and constant threat of illness or injury? The answer is almost certainly no. The Roman soldier's endurance was forged in the crucible of scarcity, and it was hunger, above all, that shaped him into the weapon of the empire. The life of a Roman soldier in the field was relentless. Hunger was constant, but so were the duties that demanded every ounce of energy from a body already stretched to the limit. After long march through hostile territory, soldiers did not simply rest. They constructed entire fortified camps, maintained watch, and trained relentlessly. Survival depended not just on enduring hunger, but on maintaining discipline under conditions designed to break the unprepared. Forts were essential to the Roman military strategy. Wherever the legions halted for the night, they were expected to dig ditches, raise earthen ramparts, and erect palisades in a matter of hours. The soldiers, already fatigued from marching, worked together to shape the fort into a defensive bastion. Trenches were dug deep, wooden stakes sharpened, and watchtowers erected, all under the supervision of centurions who demanded perfection. A poorly built camp could mean death at dawn, as enemy forces or wild animals might take advantage of any lapse. While fort construction consumed much of the day, guard duty consumed much of the night. Soldiers slept in shifts, often in cold, damp conditions, listening for every sound in the darkness. Wolves, bandits, or enemy scouts could strike at any moment. Hunger made these long nights even more grueling. The body, already weakened, struggled to maintain alertness. Soldiers relied on camaraderie, ritual, and sheer willpower to remain vigilant. Food scarcity made daily routines even harsher. Every day, soldiers had to measure their rations carefully. Hard bread was divided into precise portions. Beans, lentils, and the occasional piece of salted pork were rationed so that nothing would run out before the next supply convoy, if one ever arrived. Vinegar water was boiled or filtered to make it safe for consumption. Every mouthful counted. Waste could mean starvation for someone in the unit, but the army had its systems. Those who were adept at stretching meager supplies became indispensable. A soldier who could catch fish in a river, trap rabbits in the woods, or identify edible plants in the forest ensured the survival of not just himself, but often his comrades. Knowledge of the land was as valuable as skill with the sword. In fact, many soldiers became skilled naturalists of necessity. learning to read the landscape for food, water, and shelter. The psychological toll was immense. Men were constantly aware of their vulnerability. Hunger gnawed at the mind as well as the body. Boredom, monotony, and isolation from home wore on their spirits. Some soldiers coped with humor, telling grim jokes to ease tension. Others turned to ritual, superstition, or prayers, seeking comfort in the face of a hostile environment. Yet the majority relied on camaraderie. Sharing a tiny portion of food, a scrap of firewood, or a moment of reassurance became critical to survival. Hunger, in this sense, created bonds that were deeper than any medal or reward. Disease also haunted the camp. Standing water, poor sanitation, and close quarters made illness almost inevitable. Diarrhea, scurvy, fevers, and infections were daily threats. With rations already insufficient, the body's defenses were compromised. Soldiers who fell ill had to rely on the care of comrades or risk death. Even minor injuries could become life-threatening under such conditions. A cut could fester without proper treatment. A twisted ankle could become debilitating when there was no time to rest. Yet, through all this, the Roman soldier endured. Hunger forced efficiency, focus, and resilience. It trained the mind as much as the body. Each march, each watch, each shift in the camp strengthened the ability to endure adversity. Men learned to plan meals, preserve rations, and make the most of every calorie. They learned to adapt to every climate and landscape, finding sustenance in the most unlikely places. Survival became both a skill and a mindset. Consider the daily routine: a march before sunrise, breakfast of dry bread and pasca, hours of marching, fort construction, drills, and perhaps minor skirmishes with local tribes. Then, as night falls, guard duty begins, alternating shifts while the remaining men attempt to rest. Every movement, every decision is framed by the scarcity of food and the ever-present threat of exhaustion. For modern humans, accustomed to abundant calories and comfortable beds, such a schedule is unimaginable. For the Roman legionary, it was life, and it forged men capable of conquering continents. Even so, mental endurance was the most fragile resource. Soldiers had to push through despair, seeing friends and comrades falter under the combined pressure of hunger, disease, and fatigue. But this shared suffering created unbreakable bonds. Men who shared the smallest scrap of food, who looked after one another during night watches, became inseparable. The legion was not just an army. It was a community built on survival, forged in hunger, and disciplined by necessity. And again, we return to the question, could you endure this life? Could you wake every day knowing that hunger is unavoidable, that every step is a test of strength, that every shift in the watch threatens your sleep and safety? Could you march through mud, rain, and snow, dig trenches, lift heavy timber, and fight in combat, all while your body cries out for nourishment? Very few could. Very few would last a month, let alone a year, under these conditions. And yet, the Roman soldier endured, and through that endurance, an empire was built. The Roman soldier's endurance was tested most brutally during siege campaigns. While the march through forests and across hills demanded stamina and resilience, sieges demanded patience, ingenuity, and the ability to survive on ever-dwindling supplies. Hunger became more than a companion, it became a constant adversary, pressing in from every direction. In these campaigns, the ration was no longer merely meager. It became a matter of life and death. Sieges were often long and grueling. Cities and fortresses did not surrender easily. The enemy's walls, moats, and defensive structures forced the Romans into extended campaigns where food could not be resupplied regularly. Soldiers were left with what they had carried or what they could forage or procure from the surrounding countryside. Grain, already rationed carefully during ordinary campaigns, had to be stretched over weeks, sometimes months. A loaf that would have lasted a day on the march now needed to last 3 or even longer. During these times, ingenuity became as valuable as courage. Soldiers learned to extract every possible calorie from their rations. Bread was soaked in water, baked again, and then ground to a powder to make it stretch further. Every scrap of meat or fat was saved and carefully rationed. In some cases, they boiled leather scraps, tree bark, or even acorns to extract nutrition. These methods were unpleasant, sometimes nauseating, but they kept men alive. Survival required creativity, patience, and an iron will. Hunger sharpened the senses, but it also magnified every discomfort. Soldiers endured stomach pains, fatigue, and constant craving. The monotony of bread and posca, once tolerable on the march, became unbearable in a siege. Meals were mechanical, eaten not for pleasure but for sustenance. Even a small morsel became a treasure, shared cautiously among comrades. The psychological strain was immense, watching a neighbor slowly weaken under scarcity. Knowing that your own body could falter at any moment was a constant reminder of human fragility. Water, too, became a critical factor. Rivers could be blocked by defenders, wells contaminated, and rain sporadic. Posca vinegar mixed with water remained essential not just for taste but for safety, killing bacteria that could otherwise spread illness through the camp. Even small miscalculations, an impure water source, a misjudged ration could result in disease, collapse, or death. Siege life was a test of the mind as much as the body. The construction of siege works demanded extraordinary effort. Soldiers had to dig trenches, build towers, construct battering rams, and transport heavy stones, all while starving, exhausted, and often under enemy fire. Hunger magnified every struggle. Muscles that once carried a pack for 30 kilometers now labored under the strain of moving timber and stone. Blisters, cuts, and bruises festered in damp conditions, yet men persisted, knowing that the success of the siege and survival itself depended on their labor. In some cases, extreme scarcity forced soldiers to hunt and forage in dangerous territory. Wild game, birds, and fish became essential supplements to the ration. Trees, roots, and even acorns were collected and boiled into a tasteless porridge. Every effort was made to turn the surrounding landscape into a source of nourishment. But such activities carried risk. The enemy could ambush foragers, and poisonous plants or tainted water could result in severe illness. Psychologically, siege campaigns were relentless. Hunger, exhaustion, and constant danger created an oppressive atmosphere. Soldiers had to maintain discipline, support one another, and find small moments of hope in an otherwise bleak routine. Storytelling, shared humor, and rituals became crucial coping mechanisms. Every shared morsel, every act of camaraderie reinforced bonds that kept men alive, not just physically but mentally. Yet, despite all hardships, Roman soldiers endured. They survived on the thinnest rations, adapted to the harshest conditions, and continued their labor day after day. Hunger became a test of endurance, ingenuity, and willpower. Those who could survive these conditions emerged stronger, more disciplined, and ready for the next campaign. Those who faltered were left behind, casualties not of battle, but of survival itself. Consider this. Could you endure it? Could you march endlessly, dig trenches, lift heavy stones, and maintain vigilance while subsisting on bread, posca, and roots from the forest floor? Could you continue day after day under constant hunger, in freezing or scorching temperatures, facing disease, injury, and mental strain? Most modern humans would collapse within days. Yet the Roman soldier survived, and through his endurance, Rome expanded its empire, one grueling siege at a time. The Roman soldier faced an enemy that was silent, unyielding, and merciless: winter. While hunger and exhaustion were constant companions throughout the year, the cold magnified every struggle to near impossible extremes. Frostbite, hypothermia, and disease became as deadly as any spear or sword. In the northern provinces Britain, Germania, and beyond, survival depended on every ounce of physical endurance, ingenuity, and discipline. Imagine waking before dawn to a sky streaked with frost, the ground frozen solid beneath your feet. Your armor, already heavy, now bites into your body as your clothes chill, wet from frozen morning dew. Fingers numb, toes stiff, and muscles rigid with cold, you lace your sandals and prepare to march. Bread and posca, once just meager sustenance, are now life itself. Each bite providing energy against the cold that seeps into bones and sinews. The march is slow, deliberate, each step threatening frostbite if circulation fails. Blisters, cuts, and abrasions are no longer minor inconveniences. They are gateways to infection. Cold weather suppresses the immune system, making every tiny wound a potential disaster. Soldiers learned to wrap their feet in cloth, to layer their clothing when possible, and to use fire sparingly to conserve fuel. Frostbite could permanently damage fingers or toes, leaving men disabled in the field. Yet they could not stop. Orders demanded movement, fortification construction, and vigilance. To remain still was to risk death from cold, hunger, or enemy attack. Hunger in winter was even more severe. The body burns more calories to maintain warmth, and yet rations often remain the same. A handful of coarse bread, a bit of pork fat, and posca. Foraging becomes nearly impossible when snow covers the ground and streams freeze. Hunting small game is painstaking, sometimes futile. Soldiers boiled roots and acorns to extract calories, and in some extreme cases, they even resorted to consuming leather or bark. Every morsel was calculated, every bite rationed to maintain energy for the relentless tasks ahead. Disease spread with terrifying efficiency during winter campaigns. Dysentery, scurvy, pneumonia, and frostbite-related infections claimed more soldiers than enemy weapons. Standing water froze, contaminating supplies. Damp clothing and shoes caused trench foot, a painful and debilitating condition that left soldiers unable to march. Hypothermia could strike suddenly during night watches, when men slept shivering in makeshift shelters or dugouts. The line between life and death became razor-thin, defined by one's ability to endure, adapt, and ration strength. Winter campaigns also tested mental resilience. The monotony of snow-covered landscapes, the endless cold, and the gnawing hunger weighed heavily on morale. Soldiers relied on camaraderie, ritual, and shared purpose to maintain sanity. Jokes, stories of home, and small acts of kindness, sharing a few extra crumbs, helping a comrade with a heavy pack became lifelines. The Legion became not just an army, but a network of mutual dependence, where survival required both physical and emotional endurance. The labor never ceased. Roads had to be cleared of snow, fortifications reinforced against frost and wind, and watch rotations maintained. Hunger made these tasks excruciating, yet discipline demanded completion. Each man's body was a machine pushed to its limits, exhausted from labor, weakened by undernourishment, yet forced to keep moving. The strongest soldiers became indispensable, capable of enduring extreme cold and scarcity, while weaker men were left behind or quietly perished. Even in the most extreme conditions, ingenuity flourished. Soldiers melted snow for drinking water, insulated themselves with layers of cloth, and adapted cooking methods to preserve fuel. They became masters of survival in frozen landscapes, improvising tools and shelters to endure the brutal climate. But despite every precaution, winter campaigns were an ordeal that would crush most modern humans within days. Through it all, the Roman soldier endured. Hunger, cold, disease, and exhaustion were constant, but they forged resilience, discipline, and unity. The men who survived winter campaigns were not merely soldiers. They were living embodiments of endurance, capable of feats that would astound modern observers. And through their suffering, Rome maintained its empire, expanded its borders, and achieved victories that were as much about survival as strategy. Consider the unimaginable, marching through frost-laden forests, battling hunger, enduring icy winds, maintaining vigilance, constructing forts, and performing grueling labor, all while fighting frostbite and illness. Could you survive? Could you endure day after day, month after month, with nothing but meager rations and raw determination? Few could. And yet the Roman soldier did because survival was not optional. It was the only way to live, to fight, and to serve an empire built on the relentless endurance of its men. The Roman soldiers' greatest battles were fought not only against enemies, but also against hunger, fatigue, and the merciless demands of survival. Hunger affected everything: how soldiers moved, how they fought, and even how they thought. The meager rations of bread, beans, pork, and posca could sustain life, but they could not sustain peak physical or mental performance. And yet, in the crucible of scarcity, Roman soldiers became a machine of endurance, strategy, and resilience. Imagine standing in formation on a battlefield after days of minimal food. Your muscles ache from endless march, frostbite, or blisters bite into your skin, and your stomach gnaws for sustenance. Your weapon, spear, sword, shield feel heavier than usual, Your mind struggles to focus, fatigue pressing down with every heartbeat. Around you, comrades are similarly weakened, some shivering, some groaning in pain. Yet the enemy approaches. Panic would be understandable, but discipline is absolute. Hunger has taught control. Hunger has taught patience. Hunger has made you more resilient than most men alive. Combat in these conditions required extraordinary psychological strength. Hunger can cloud judgment, slow reflexes, and sap courage. Soldiers trained rigorously to overcome these effects, learning to fight through discomfort, to maintain formation even when exhaustion threatened to crumble the line. Every swing of the gladius, every thrust of the pilum, was performed not with the comfort of nourishment, but with raw determination and sheer willpower. Tactics were shaped by scarcity. Commanders knew their men could not sustain prolonged engagements without resupply. Battles were calculated to achieve objectives quickly and efficiently. Foraging parties and supply units were vital, often acting as lifelines for men weakened by hunger. In some campaigns, soldiers would engage in ambush or night raids, using stealth and strategy to minimize exertion and conserve energy. Hunger did not just weaken the body, it sharpened the mind, forcing soldiers to think creatively under pressure. Yet the physical toll was enormous. Weakness from undernourishment made every maneuver more dangerous. Soldiers struggled to carry heavy packs or maintain their shields during prolonged engagements. Blisters and joint pain worsened with every step, and those already ill or injured often fell mid-battle. Disease, malnutrition, and exhaustion claimed more lives than arrows or swords. And still, soldiers pressed on, driven by discipline, camaraderie, and the knowledge that survival depended on collective effort. Hunger also affected morale and psychology. The constant gnawing in the stomach, combined with fatigue, made frustration and despair common. Yet, in the disciplined Roman army, comradeship acted as a counterbalance. Soldiers shared whatever food they could, encouraged one another, and relied on rituals and routines to maintain mental stability. This camaraderie became a lifeline, a force multiplier that allowed men to fight beyond what their bodies seemed capable of. Hunger, paradoxically, forged bonds that were stronger than any weapon. In extended campaigns, this endurance shaped the very outcomes of battles. Armies capable of marching farther, foraging smarter, and enduring harsher conditions had a decisive advantage over enemies with more abundant food but less discipline. Hunger became a silent weapon. The Roman soldier who could survive on minimal rations, maintain vigilance, and fight relentlessly could outlast larger or better-fed opponents. Scarcity honed efficiency, sharpened focus, and created soldiers who were as much masters of survival as they were of combat. Consider this scenario. A battle stretches over hours, yet your stomach is empty, your muscles screaming, your fingers stiff from cold. The enemy falters, but you are exhausted. You swing your sword anyway, maintain the shield wall, and push forward with a combination of strategy, discipline, and sheer will. Few modern humans could endure such conditions for more than minutes. The Roman soldier did it day after day, month after month, campaign after campaign. Hunger and combat were intertwined, each amplifying the other, creating a level of endurance that remains almost unimaginable today. And yet, victory was not just measured in territory or spoils, it was measured in survival. Each soldier who endured hunger, disease, and extreme conditions and returned home alive was a testament to the unimaginable resilience demanded by the Roman military system. The rations, though meager, were a crucible that separated the strong from the weak, the disciplined from the undisciplined, and the survivors from the casualties. The Roman soldier fought not only against enemies on the battlefield, but also against enemies invisible to the eye: disease, infection, and the devastating effects of starvation. While hunger weakened the body, it also opened the door to sickness, turning even minor wounds into life-threatening injuries. In the cramped, damp, and unsanitary conditions of military camps, survival was a daily battle against illness as much as against swords or spears. Illness was relentless. Dysentery, caused by contaminated water or poor sanitation, swept through camps with terrifying speed. Soldiers weakened by malnutrition were particularly vulnerable. A single infection could incapacitate dozens, sometimes hundreds, within days. Vomiting, diarrhea, fever, and dehydration became deadly when the body lacked the reserves to fight back. Those who survived often did so by sheer willpower, careful rationing, and the assistance of comrades, who carried water, shared scraps of food, and helped tend to wounds. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, was another invisible killer. Without fresh fruits and vegetables, soldiers developed bleeding gums, swollen joints, and extreme fatigue. The disease weakened muscles and bones, leaving men incapable of marching or fighting effectively. Even the strongest soldiers could be brought to collapse, their endurance tested to its very limit. In some campaigns, entire legions suffered from scurvy, unable to perform routine duties or respond effectively in battle. Infections from wounds were commonplace and often fatal. A small cut, caused by a blade, a thorn, or a mishap with tools, could fester in unsanitary conditions of the camp. Mud, bacteria, and constant dampness accelerated infection. And with limited medical knowledge and scarce supplies, soldiers often faced amputation or death. Gangrene, boils, and festering sores were common. Even minor injuries could lead to long-term disability, further reducing the effectiveness of a unit and adding to the psychological toll on men who watched comrades succumb to preventable conditions. Parasites, lice, and fleas were constant companions. Soldiers slept in close quarters, often in wet or muddy conditions, allowing pests to thrive. The itching, irritation, and spread of disease further weakened men already battling hunger. The psychological strain of these living conditions cannot be overstated. Constant discomfort, combined with the threat of illness and injury, pushed soldiers to their mental limits. The mind, fatigued and hungry, struggled to maintain focus, discipline, and morale. Hunger intensified all these horrors. The body's immune system, starved of protein and essential nutrients, could not fight back effectively. Minor illnesses became deadly. Exhaustion from constant march and labor left men vulnerable to hypothermia, heat stroke, and infection. Every ration was precious, every sip of water carefully considered. Yet even these measures could not fully protect soldiers from the relentless pressures of disease and scarcity. Yet even under these conditions, soldiers demonstrated remarkable ingenuity and resilience. Knowledge of medicinal herbs, careful hygiene practices, and the creation of makeshift remedies became essential survival skills. Soldiers boiled water, washed wounds with vinegar, and used plants with antiseptic properties to slow the progress of infection. Small acts of care between comrades sharing blankets, assisting the weak, or offering extra rations could mean the difference between life and death. Hunger and disease forced men to become masters of survival, learning lessons in resilience that modern humans would find almost unimaginable. The psychological impact of living under constant threat from illness was profound. Soldiers faced the horror of seeing friends and comrades weakened, disabled, or killed by conditions they could not control. Fear, despair, and anxiety were constant companions. Yet the discipline of the Roman army, reinforced through strict hierarchy and camaraderie, allowed men to continue functioning despite the mental toll. Survival depended not only on strength, but on trust, coordination, and the shared determination to endure. Even the empire itself depended on the resilience of these men. Rome's military might was not only in its tactics or weapons, but in the ability of soldiers to withstand scarcity, disease, and extreme hardship. The survival of the legion in the face of illness, infection, and hunger was a testament to human endurance, ingenuity, and discipline. Without these qualities, campaigns would have collapsed under the weight of invisible killers long before any battle was fought. Now, consider the unimaginable reality: marching day after day, laboring endlessly, fighting in battle, and sleeping in wet, cramped conditions, all while your body is weakened by starvation and your comrades succumb to disease. Could you endure this with frostbite, gangrene, scurvy, dysentery, and parasites gnawing at your body? Most modern humans would not survive more than a few days. Yet the Roman soldier endured month after month, campaign after campaign. Hunger, infection, and disease were relentless, but so was the resolve to survive. The Roman soldier's life was a constant struggle, a test of body and mind pushed to the limits of endurance. And through hunger, disease, injury, and exhaustion, Roman soldiers persisted. Their survival was not just remarkable, it was the foundation of an empire, built on the unyielding resilience of men who learned to endure conditions that would have destroyed nearly anyone else. Hunger, sickness, and scarcity were not just obstacles. They were the crucible that forged the strength and discipline of one of history's most formidable military forces. The Roman soldier's endurance was tested not only in individual battles or harsh seasons, but across entire campaigns that could last months or even years. These long-term campaigns were a grueling test of body, mind, and spirit. Hunger, fatigue, and monotony wore down men in ways that even the fiercest battles could not. The struggle for survival was constant, and desertion, though punishable by death, was a persistent risk. Months on campaign meant marching through forests, hills, rivers, and swamps while carrying armor, weapons, and limited provisions. Each day brought physical exhaustion. Blisters, joint pain, frostbite, and sunburn accumulated, wearing down soldiers who were already weakened by meager rations. Hunger gnawed relentlessly, sapping energy and making every task more difficult. The human body is not designed for such sustained strain, yet Roman discipline demanded endurance beyond what most modern humans could imagine. Fatigue was a pervasive enemy. Soldiers rarely slept for long stretches, alternating shifts on watch, maintaining fortifications, and standing guard in freezing or scorching weather. Muscles ached constantly while minds struggled to maintain focus. Simple tasks, lifting a heavy pack, swinging a sword, digging a trench became monumental challenges. Mental resilience was tested as acutely as physical strength, for exhaustion amplifies fear, frustration, and despair. In these conditions, even the slightest lapse in vigilance could mean death. Desertion was a constant threat, both to the soldier and the army. Some men, unable to endure the relentless hunger, exhaustion, and monotony, would flee the camp under cover of night. For those who remained, the psychological burden was immense. The fear that comrades would vanish, the stress of maintaining discipline under extreme conditions, and the knowledge that survival required unbroken cohesion. Punishments for desertion were severe, often death, but the fact that men attempted it at all underscores the unimaginable hardships of long-term campaigns. Hunger, too, was an insidious opponent. A soldier's rations, designed for basic survival, were never enough to sustain peak physical or mental performance over extended periods. Dry bread, beans, salted meat, and posca were repetitive, monotonous, and nutritionally limited. Soldiers learned to stretch every bite, supplement with foraging, and share with comrades to survive. Yet, even with ingenuity, fatigue and malnutrition compounded with time, gradually eroding the strength of units and the morale of men. Monotony added another layer of psychological strain. Long marches across snow, mud, or scorching plains, punctuated only by brief skirmishes, made time drag endlessly. Soldiers had to maintain focus and discipline in an environment devoid of stimulation or comfort. The human mind, deprived of variety and under constant hunger, often faltered. Mental fatigue led to mistakes in formation, mishandling of weapons, and reduced efficiency in labor, all of which could have fatal consequences. Camaraderie was essential to endure these long campaigns. Soldiers relied on one another to maintain morale and sanity. Shared jokes, stories from home, and small acts of kindness, sharing rations, assisting a wounded comrade, or offering warmth during freezing nights became vital for survival. Bonds formed under these extreme conditions were unbreakable, creating loyalty and cohesion that transcended personal discomfort or fear. Hunger, fatigue, and monotony forged not only endurance but also trust and dependence among men. Disease and injury compounded the psychological toll. Dysentery, scurvy, frostbite, infections, and parasites persisted, claiming lives and weakening units. Witnessing comrades suffer or die was a constant mental strain. The line between life and death was thin, and fear was always present. Yet discipline, training, and shared purpose helped soldiers maintain function under pressure. The ability to endure hunger, illness, fatigue, and monotony became a defining characteristic of Roman military power. Even morale depended on structure. Commanders carefully monitored men, assigning tasks, rotating duties, and enforcing routines. Predictability provided comfort amidst chaos. Soldiers who could not endure were sometimes reassigned, punished, or, in extreme cases, executed, reinforcing the seriousness of discipline and survival. Hunger and scarcity were not just physical challenges, they were psychological tests, shaping men into soldiers capable of extraordinary resilience. In these long-term campaigns, the Roman soldier became more than a fighter. He became a master of endurance, strategy, and survival. Hunger, fatigue, disease, and psychological strain were relentless teachers. Men who survived emerged hardened, disciplined, and capable of feats far beyond what modern humans could imagine. They endured what few could survive, and through their resilience, Rome maintained its empire across continents and centuries. So again, consider the question, could you endure months or years of continuous march, fatigue, disease, and hunger? Could you maintain discipline and cohesion while witnessing comrades weaken, fall ill, or desert? Could you perform under the relentless monotony of long-term campaigns while every day testing your body and mind to the absolute limit? Few could, yet the Roman soldier did because endurance was not optional. It was survival. Hunger, fatigue, and psychological strain were the forge that tempered men into the backbone of an empire. The Roman soldier faced his harshest test not only on open battlefields but during prolonged sieges, where hunger, fear, and psychological torment converged into an almost unbearable crucible. Siege warfare was a battle of attrition, a struggle not only against walls, enemy forces, or siege engines, but against the inexorable pressure of starvation. These campaigns pushed soldiers to the brink of collapse, testing endurance, discipline, and ingenuity to extremes few modern humans could comprehend. Sieges could last months, sometimes even years. Roman forces would encircle fortified cities or enemy strongholds, cutting off supplies while constructing their own defensive works. Soldiers had to maintain vigilance, constantly patrolling, building trenches, erecting siege towers, and manning watch posts while rations dwindled day by day. Every morsel of food was precious. Soldiers carefully rationed bread, salted meat, and posca, knowing that miscalculations could cost lives. The defenders, too, used starvation as a weapon. Cities under siege often withheld resources, attempting to break morale and weaken the attacking force. Soldiers faced a harrowing paradox. To capture the enemy, they had to endure extreme deprivation themselves. Hunger gnawed relentlessly, weakening the body, clouding judgment, and making every laborious task a battle. Marching, lifting, and digging became feats of sheer will, while fatigue compounded the effects of malnutrition. Extreme ingenuity became necessary. Roman soldiers learned to stretch rations in extraordinary ways. Dry bread was softened, rebaked, or ground to make thin porridge. Roots, acorns, and wild plants were collected and boiled to extract minimal nutrition. Even the smallest scraps of meat or fat were carefully preserved. The soldier's survival depended on creativity, precision, and the discipline to ration resources perfectly. Every bite was a calculation. Every sip of water was sacred. Psychological pressure was just as deadly as physical deprivation. Hunger magnified fear and anxiety. Watching comrades weaken, fall ill, or even die from exhaustion or disease amplified mental strain. The monotony of encampment life, punctuated by constant labor and danger, was mentally exhausting. Yet soldiers relied on camaraderie, ritual, and shared resilience to endure. Small acts sharing extra food, helping with chores, comforting the weak became lifelines in a landscape of despair. Sieges also amplified the physical toll of exhaustion. Soldiers labored long hours building siege engines, battering rams and ladders, often under enemy fire. Their bodies, weakened by hunger and illness, were pushed to extremes. Blisters, bruises, and frostbite or burns from exposure compounded the misery. Disease spread rapidly in these cramped camps. Dysentery, scurvy, and fevers claimed men as surely as enemy weapons. Survival demanded both strength and cunning, the ability to endure physical pain while maintaining the focus necessary for complex engineering and combat tasks. Hunger and psychological strain created a dangerous feedback loop. Weakness made labor and vigilance more difficult, mistakes became more likely, and morale declined. Commanders had to balance the physical and mental capacities of their troops, assigning tasks according to strength, monitoring rations, and enforcing discipline rigorously. Those who could not endure faced reassignment, punishment, or, in extreme cases, execution. Desertion was a constant temptation, yet the risk was almost always death if caught. Despite these hardships, the Roman soldier endured. Hunger taught efficiency, scarcity demanded discipline, suffering forged resilience. Soldiers learned to find food where there was none, to improvise, and to persist even when the body screamed for rest. Night watches, long marches, and continuous labor became routine. Survival was not guaranteed, but those who persisted became the backbone of the army, capable of feats far beyond what the untested mind and body could imagine. The psychological resilience required during sieges was staggering. Soldiers faced isolation, fear, and the constant reminder of mortality. Yet discipline and camaraderie sustained them. Humor, rituals, and small comforts letters from home. Stories shared around a fire, a shared sip of water helped stave off despair. Hunger was not simply a physical condition. It was a mental test, shaping men into warriors capable of enduring what would break almost anyone else. Consider the unimaginable reality, laboring tirelessly on siege engines, maintaining watches and defending encampments, all while your body weakens day by day from hunger, disease, and exhaustion. Could you endure months of this, with minimal food, freezing or scorching conditions, and constant danger? Most modern humans would collapse within days. Yet the Roman soldier endured because survival demanded discipline, ingenuity, and unrelenting perseverance. Hunger, deprivation, and psychological strain were not merely obstacles, they were the crucible that forged men into instruments of empire, capable of bending even time itself to their will. The battles ended, the sieges were won or lost. The enemy had retreated, surrendered, or perished. Yet for the Roman soldier, the conclusion of a campaign did not signify relief, comfort, or reward. It marked the beginning of another grueling phase, recovery, reintegration, and the long-lasting consequences of hunger, fatigue, and hardship. Months, sometimes years of deprivation left scars that would not vanish overnight. The body and mind, pushed to the brink, required time, care, and patience to regain equilibrium. After extended campaigns, soldiers returned to garrisons or temporary camps to rest, but rest was never indulgent. Wounds, blisters, frostbite, and burns demanded treatment. Malnutrition left men weak and susceptible to illness. Soldiers who had survived extreme scarcity often faced delayed consequences, slow healing wounds, infections, and long-term damage to muscles, joints, and internal organs. The rations, once barely enough for survival, had depleted reserves to the point that recovery required gradual reintroduction of nourishment. Each bite of food was a careful measure, as overeating could cause severe discomfort or even illness. Psychologically, soldiers faced challenges equally daunting. Months of hunger, constant vigilance, and exposure to disease and death had left deep impressions. Many returned traumatized, carrying memories of starvation, loss, and relentless labor. Fear, anxiety, and survivor's guilt were common. Soldiers witnessed comrades die from exhaustion or infection, often in moments that seemed mundane yet were charged with life or death stakes. Reintegration required both mental and emotional strength, as men had to adjust from extreme scarcity to relative normalcy while coping with the shadows of their experiences. Camaraderie remained vital. Bonds forged during extreme deprivation and battle carried into the recovery phase. Soldiers relied on each other to rebuild morale, share stories, and provide mutual support. Units remained cohesive, not merely as a matter of discipline, but as a lifeline of emotional and practical aid. Meals were shared carefully, tasks were distributed according to remaining strength, and rituals or minor celebrations were observed to reinforce a sense of community and purpose. The lessons learned under hunger, fatigue, and illness shaped not only survival skills but also social bonds that could withstand immense pressure. Medical care, though rudimentary by modern standards, became crucial. Physicians and medics attended to lingering injuries, infections, and the effects of malnutrition. Soldiers were taught to rest, consume nourishing foods gradually, and rehabilitate damaged limbs and joints. Herbs, poultices, and other improvised remedies played a significant role. Yet, even with care, many men bore permanent consequences. Missing teeth, scarred skin, frostbite, and joint issues were lasting reminders of the campaigns. Hunger and scarcity left a legacy etched into their bodies, evidence of endurance few could imagine. The reintegration into garrison life or civilian duties tested the limits of patience and resilience. Soldiers had to transition from the constant strain of campaigns marching, laboring, foraging, and fighting to routines that demanded different kinds of discipline. Muscles accustomed to carrying heavy packs for long hours were now idle, while minds accustomed to vigilance now faced monotony. The physical and psychological adjustments were subtle but critical. Those who failed to adapt risked collapse, depression, or illness, while those who succeeded became stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. The lasting impact of hunger and hardship was not limited to the physical or psychological. Experience shaped tactics, strategy, and the ethos of the army itself. Soldiers who had endured scarcity and deprivation understood efficiency, resourcefulness, and the limits of human endurance. Commanders relied on their insights to plan campaigns, ration supplies, and train new recruits. Hunger, scarcity, and extreme hardship were not merely obstacles, they were teachers, forging skills, discipline, and resilience that became institutional knowledge within the Roman military. Even after campaigns ended, stories of endurance circulated among soldiers. Accounts of surviving frostbite, disease, sieges, and starvation became legendary, forming part of the oral history of the legions. These tales reinforced a culture of resilience and preparedness, warning new recruits of the hardships ahead while inspiring them to endure. Hunger and hardship became a crucible for character, discipline, and camaraderie, creating soldiers capable of feats far beyond what modern humans could endure. Consider the unimaginable reality, returning from months or years of constant hunger, fatigue, and danger, your body battered, your mind scarred, yet needing to reintegrate, recover, and continue service. Could you endure such prolonged deprivation and still function? Could you find strength after months of scarcity and hardship? Few could. Yet the Roman soldier did. His survival was not just a testament to physical endurance, but to mental fortitude, discipline, and the extraordinary resilience demanded by an empire built on the relentless perseverance of its men. Through recovery and reintegration, the Roman soldier emerged hardened, capable, and ever vigilant. Hunger and scarcity left their mark, but they also imparted lessons in survival, endurance, and human resilience. These men were not merely warriors, they were living testaments to the limits of endurance, embodying a combination of physical strength, mental fortitude, and social cohesion that enabled the Roman army to achieve victories across continents. The hardships endured, though harrowing, were the foundation upon which Rome's power rested. The Roman soldier's journey from the first march to the last battle was a continuous test of endurance, discipline, and survival. Hunger, fatigue, disease, frostbite, and psychological strain were constants, shaping men into instruments of empire. In this final part, we reflect on the ultimate lessons of survival, the legacy left by these warriors, and the almost unimaginable human resilience that sustained an empire across continents for centuries. Imagine a soldier at the end of a campaign, body battered, muscles screaming, stomach gnawed by hunger, fingers stiff from frost, joints aching from march and labor. His mind carries the memories of friends lost to disease, the fear of collapsing under exhaustion, and the relentless grind of battle and siege. Yet he has survived. Against odds that would crush most modern humans within days, he endures. Survival itself becomes an achievement, a triumph over forces that are invisible yet lethal, scarcity, disease, and exhaustion. Hunger shaped everything: movement, decision-making, morale, and combat effectiveness. A soldier who could survive on meager rations, maintain discipline, and fight while starving was more valuable than the strongest man in full health. Scarcity demanded ingenuity improvising food, rationing carefully, finding resources in barren lands. These were not just survival skills, but strategies that defined Roman military success. Hunger was not just an obstacle. It was a crucible that forged endurance, resilience, and strategic thinking. Disease and infection were silent killers, claiming more lives than enemy weapons. Dysentery, scurvy, Frostbite, gangrene, and parasites weakened men. Yet those who persevered became embodiments of survival. They learned to protect themselves, to tend wounds with primitive remedies, to ration water and food, and to endure physical pain without faltering. The body was tested. The mind was tested even more. Witnessing comrades suffer or die demanded mental fortitude, emotional resilience, and unwavering discipline. Long campaigns and sieges imposed additional layers of challenge. Months of monotony, fatigue, and vigilance pushed soldiers to psychological limits. Desertion was a constant risk. Failure was a real possibility. Yet discipline, camaraderie, and shared purpose enabled survival. Soldiers relied on one another, not just for physical support, but for emotional endurance. Humor, ritual, shared stories, and acts of care became lifelines in the face of relentless deprivation. These bonds created cohesion, allowing the army to function as a single organism even when individual bodies faltered. Recovery after campaigns was another test. Bodies weakened by scarcity required careful nourishment. Minds scarred by trauma required reintegration. Soldiers bore lasting marks, missing teeth, scars, frostbite, and chronic ailments. Yet these men returned hardened, capable, and wiser. Experience shaped tactics, strategy, and the ethos of the army. Hunger, disease, and exhaustion became institutional knowledge. Lessons passed to new recruits, ensuring that the next generation could endure the unimaginable. The legacy of Roman soldiers is extraordinary because it highlights human resilience at its extreme. These men endured conditions far beyond what most modern humans could survive. Hunger, deprivation, and extreme physical labor became part of a system that produced discipline, efficiency, and cohesion. Each soldier was not merely a fighter, but a master of survival, capable of feats that remain almost inconceivable today. Their endurance ensured the expansion and maintenance of an empire that reshaped the world. Consider the ultimate reflection. Could you endure months of scarcity, disease, fatigue, and monotony? Could you maintain discipline while your body weakens, your comrades fall, and your mind wrestles with fear and despair? Few could, the Roman soldier did. And in his survival, we glimpse the limits of human resilience. Hunger was not just a challenge. It was a teacher. Fatigue was not just an obstacle. It was a forge. Scarcity, disease, and danger combined to create men capable of sustaining an empire. Even today, the lessons endure. We study the Roman soldier not merely to understand history, but to marvel at the extraordinary adaptability of humans. These men survived conditions that would break nearly anyone, achieving feats that defy imagination. Discipline, camaraderie, ingenuity, and resilience, these were the tools that enabled survival under the harshest circumstances. Hunger and scarcity shaped character, forged mental and physical strength, and left a legacy that echoes through history. As the final reflection, imagine standing in the boots of a Roman soldier, the sun rising over frost-laden fields, the smell of campfires, the taste of meager bread. And Posca, the ache of muscles, the sting of frost, the fear of disease, but also the camaraderie, the discipline, and the fierce determination to survive. You have endured hunger, cold, disease, fatigue, and monotony. You have marched, fought, and labored beyond what modern humans could endure. You have survived? The story of the Roman soldier is not just a tale of warfare or empire. It is a testament to the limits of human endurance. Hunger, deprivation, and hardship were never incidental. They were the forge in which resilience was crafted. These men remind us that survival is more than nutrition or strength, it is discipline, ingenuity, camaraderie, and unyielding willpower. Few could endure as they did, yet they did. They survived the impossible, and through that endurance, they built a legacy that would echo through centuries. So, the ultimate question remains, could you survive as a Roman soldier? Could you endure hunger that gnaws at your bones, fatigue that crushes your muscles, disease that strikes without warning, and the psychological strain of constant danger? Few could, and that is why the Roman soldier's story continues to captivate, terrify, and inspire. It is a story of human limits, of survival against all odds, and of an endurance so extraordinary that history itself bends to acknowledge it.